The question of could a writer bring a secondary character forward into empathy with the audience, even more empathy than perhaps the audience has with the protagonist? The answer could to any question that begins with could is sure. Yes, you could have a secondary character become more intriguing, more empathetic, more involving than the protagonist. You could do that, of course you could. And occasionally in stories that happens. I remember in The Dark Knight, the Batman character was very cold and very distant, but Heath Ledger's Joker was fascinating for us, and I think more involving than the protagonist. And so occasionally a secondary character can step forward and sort of take over a story. So the question is not could you do that? Of course you could. The question is why? Why would you do that? Why would you want one of your secondary characters to step forward and perhaps even take over the story somehow in the audience's interest? Why wouldn't you keep them at the level of a subplot? Subplots, of course, have their own protagonists. More often than not, subplots center around a secondary character. That character, to a certain degree, becomes empathetic perhaps to the audience and interesting and curious to the audience, but it is a subplot. It's given less screen time, less emphasis than the central plot, but nonetheless, secondary characters then may have their own story for a while at least. We often involve the audience in secondary characters and draw empathy toward them. But the bigger question is, do we allow them to take over the whole work itself? And the answer is yes, you could do that. But you would have to have a very good reason for that. And if the answer to the question why am I allowing this secondary character to come forward in the story and eventually take over the storytelling from my protagonist, if the answer to that question why is a good one, then do it. And obviously what's happening is a secondary character is becoming a primary character and maybe taking over the story as the story's protagonist. And that happens too. If you know why you're doing it, then great. I remember there was a film called The Killing Fields, which seems to be at the beginning of the story. You think about a journalist, an American journalist in Cambodia, and he's got a helper character, a Cambodian reporter who's translating for him and assisting him, and he is a secondary character. And then halfway through the film, the American journalist leaves Cambodia because of the great civil war that's going on, and the killing fields begin, the massacre, the genocide begins in Cambodia, and the story shifts then and lets this secondary character, the Cambodian journalist, take over and dominate, becomes the protagonist for the last, 2/3 of the film. And there was a very good reason why the writer did this. They wanted to introduce this Cambodian character as a secondary character in support of the protagonist, so that over the first third or so of the film we got to know this guy and care about him, so that the baton could be shifted from the American journalist to the Cambodian reporter 2/3 of the way through the film, and the audience's empathy had already been gained for this character, and then he just took over the whole movie. And so they did it in order to draw an audience into empathy with a character that was so foreign to them that they may or may not have empathized without this introduction as a secondary character at the beginning of the film. And it worked wonderfully. And so if the reason why you're going to allow a secondary character to come forward and take over the film is a good one, then you do whatever works.